Hello and welcome to this episode of the Global Innovators in Business series. In this series, we bring leaders and innovators from different fields to share their advice and experiences with undergraduate students to provide inspiration and motivation during the pandemic. We're so happy to have with us Dr. Sandhya Sriram and Dr. Ling. Sandhya and Kai are the co-founders of Shiok Meats. Their team have been working on a cell-based clean seafood company with their current main research being in cell-based shrimp. This full interview is also dedicated to New Harvest, a research institute accelerating breakthroughs in cellular agriculture. New Harvest strategically funds and conducts open, public, and collaborative research that reinvents the way we make animal products without animals. Learn more about this and in the link description. Thank you so much, Sandhya and Kai, for joining.
Yeah, pleasure being here. Thank you. Sorry, Kai.
No worries.
So the first question is always, why did you choose to dedicate this interview to the nonprofit? And in this case, why New Harvest?
Yeah, so I think when we first started off Shiok Meats, one of the organizations that we came across was New Harvest. Mm-hmm. We know it's a nonprofit organization that advocates and educates people on cell-based meats. They also give out fellowships and grants as well. And we actually reached out to the founder, Isha Datar, early on, and if I'm not wrong, I think Kai has met her. Yeah, Kai, do you want to?
Yes, I've met both Isha and Kate. They usually have an annual conference on cell-based meats. They are great in bringing both undergrads and academics and the startup industry together, and it has been a great experience working with them. So they actually sponsor students not just in the US, but they also have other fellowships in New Zealand as well, from what in UK, so all around the world. And before COVID, these students had retreats together, and it's really exciting to see young students get into the field, and a lot of them actually go on to join startups or build their own startups or continue the work in the academic world. So they're great. I think it's a great nonprofit that really focuses on the cell-based meats area.
Yeah, actually, I think they just announced they're like accepting a few more roles or interviews during this next year. So definitely check them out. And it's all about bring new kinds of meats or new kinds of products that can replace meat into the world. And talking about that, going directly into the discussion. Usually we don't go directly into your company, but in this case, it's such a novel, innovative idea. So could you talk about what you and your team at Shiok Meats do?
Sure. So Shiok Meats is a cell-based seafood and meat company. We are located in Singapore, and that's where we are headquartered. So currently we are in research and development, so we don't have any products in the market yet. But we're looking to hopefully launch our first product commercially in Singapore in the next 2 years, so around mid to end of 2022. Mm-hmm. So the company is about less than 2.5 years old. So we started in August 2018, and Kai and I are the founders. So we are, again, a cell-based clean meat and seafood company. What I mean by that is we produce meat and seafood using stem cells and cells. So that, leaves out the idea of growing a full animal to actually slaughter it and eat the meat. So what we do here is only grow part of the animal or only grow part of the meat that we actually consume. What I mean by that is, let's say we concentrate on shrimp, crab, lobster, and crayfish, so crustaceans. So let's take lobster. Honestly, none of us eat the shells, or none of it eat the claws and so on. So what we do is we don't grow any of those parts. We only grow the part of the meat or the juicy meat that's inside that we actually take out of the shell and then eat. So we only grow the meat, and we grow it using stem cells and cells from the animal. Kai can talk a bit more about why stem cells are great and why we don't have to keep going back to the animal. But why we call it clean and sustainable is because we don't use the excessive antibiotics or there's no accumulation of microplastics or heavy metals. These are some of the issues of the seafood industry. And we also can fortify the meats with nutrition, like can we increase the omega-3 fatty acids, or can we, work around with the protein content and so on. But for now, we're trying to produce simple, or rather the meats that we're used to eating, or the seafood that we're used to eating, but without harming animals, without having the need to clear out mangroves or the need to go into the oceans to catch these animals per se. So, and the land, the water, and the energy use that we use at our facilities are much lower. So that keeps it environment friendly, because we don't have the need to kill animals over and over again, which is currently what's happening. There's animal friendly, and there is no accumulation of heavy metals, microplastics, or excessive use of antibiotics. So it's health friendly as well. But yeah, Ka can add a bit more light on the technology side of things.
Sure. Thanks, Sandhya. So all of the cell-based industry kind of focus around the stem cells. And if you're not familiar with it, stem cells are everywhere in all live animals, in us human beings. Each of our different organs have its own special type of stem cells. So what we do is that, why stem cells are so special is that they have this inherent ability to keep replicating itself. It can keep dividing in the right conditions. So instead of, an endpoint, with the right conditions, we can keep growing more and more of the cells. So what we do is that for us, we need to take a live animal, for example, shrimp, and then we take out the stem cells that make muscle or fat, which is what is the main part of the meats we eat. And then once we have those cells isolated, we do a lot of research to find out what is the best conditions, what is the best nutrients that's needed to keep them growing and expanding. So that's kind of the nutrient part of it. And then at scale, what you will see is that instead of like a brewery where you have tanks brewing beer, we have the similar tanks brewing shrimp meat.
Wait, just to go back. So you take a stem cell and then from a shrimp or another animal, and then you bring it into this media which hosts the proteins in a tank, or in this case, like a housing place for them to continue.
Yes, that's right.
And then the next step is it grows into a certain size, and then you deliver it.
And then we harvest it, separate it from the nutrients that we are feeding it, the liquid, and then what we get is minced meat. So you don't have to chop up your meats anymore. So at this point, you can look into either shaping them into with either tissue engineering techniques like scaffolds, 3D printing to get into the shape and texture we're all familiar with, or we can just take the minced product to make dumplings, shrimp balls, things that are processed already.
What is in that mixture of
nutrient feed?
I see.
Yeah, it's basically a mix of like digested nutrients that we will usually eat, or the shrimp will usually eat, but in a digested form. So like amino acids, sugars, fatty acids, vitamins, minerals, things that basically keep us or living things healthy and growing.
I see. But in a liquid form, so that stem cells absorb them?
Yeah, because basically their cells, they don't have a digestive system, so we have to do the digestion for them.
Interesting. I see. Okay.
It's kind of like, to put it in simple English, I think it's kind of like making yogurt or sourdough to an extent. So you provide a medium. So let's take yogurt. So you provide a medium, which is milk, which is packed with nutrients and so on. And then you add a starter culture, which actually has lactobacteria in it, or lactobacillus, if I'm not wrong. I might not have got that right, but yeah, there's a bacteria that basically ferments milk to form yogurt, and you provide that bacteria with nutrients, which is the milk itself. And then overnight or in a day or so, what you get is actually yogurt. And then you take a little bit of that yogurt again to make another batch, and then you keep going on with that. So similar to that, in our case, we can just take a little bit of the stem cells from the batch that we have to start another batch of forming seafood and meat. So you don't have to keep going back to the animal over and over again. Yeah.
That's a great analogy. Wow. So how long does this take for one cell to become a full shrimp?
Okay. Yeah.
So this kind of depends on how much meat you want to grow. Generally, the production process takes about 4 to 6 weeks is kind of the production process.
And what is the benefits of growing meat in this manner?
Yeah, so over the years, what's happened is we have, moved away from traditional farming. Like if you had asked your grandparents, probably they knew the name of the animal that they had their chickens from, or their milk from, or their meats from. It was a cow or a chicken growing in their backyard. And, that was the animal that provided them with the nutrition and the access to the meats and so on. But what's happened over the years is that has kind of reduced, and what's come up is more factory farming, these crowded conditions, horrible conditions where these animals are grown, issues with overuse of antibiotics. Because these animals are overcrowded, they start getting susceptible to diseases. So these farmers end up using a lot of antibiotics and the chemicals and so on. And then eventually, we have seen enough videos of animal cruelty that happens in these factory farms as well. So I think consumers like us, especially the younger generation, like our audience, is a bit more bothered about where their food comes from, how it's made, who made it, where it was made, and what are the conditions in which these foods were made, or the food products are made. So as consumers started asking a lot of these questions, and as the diseases starting spreading a lot more. So you have heard about bird flu and swine flu, and it's even predicted that COVID actually is from a meat market in China, for example. So given all of these, people started questioning whether these practices were valid, whether these are sustainable. Coming to seafood, there's a study actually from the US that shows that we don't have enough sea animals in the ocean. If we catch them all, we won't have enough food in the ocean in the next 5 years. It's not 10 years, it's not 50 years, it's not 15 years, it's just 5 years. So we're running out of sea animals at the rate that we're consuming. The third factor is that the population growth is not stopping anywhere, literally. So they've predicted that we're going to be 10 billion people in the next 3 decades, which is 30 years. And that means we need more and more sources of protein and food out there. So given that these 3 are the reasons, and of course, a blanket reason for all of this is climate change and global warming, all of the methane that's being produced by the factory farms, farming up cows and so on, all of the issues with the ocean and, the ocean animals depleting. And it's all a cycle, right? All of this is leading to climate change and global warming, and that's affecting our food production and food supply as well. So it's kind of goes hand in hand. So all of these put together, a bunch of innovators and entrepreneurs like ourselves came up with this idea of disrupting the food industry with innovation, where we can look at plant-based meats that are out there. So you might have heard about Impossible Foods and Beyond Burger and Omnipork and so on, which are plant-based alternatives to meat. But then what we realized was the consumers actually want meat. They have an emotional connection to meat. It's a cultural thing. It's an emotional thing. And you can tell people to become vegans and vegetarians, but not all of them are going to convert. You can get some people to give up meat on a certain part of the day or a certain day of the week, but we still love our meats and seafood. So what cell-based meats technology do is they actually give you the meat and the seafood that you are used to, but without killing animals, without harming the environment as much, and without having the issue of where it comes from, how it's made, and the transparency that's required in the food industry. So at the end of the day, what we're producing is actual meat and actual seafood. To the DNA level, it's actual meat because it comes from the stem cells. We are not trying to mimic meat. We are not trying to, it's not fake or artificial. Like I mentioned again, it is actual meat, but the source of it is different in the sense that you don't have to grow a full grown animal, then slaughter it and then eat parts of it. You can only grow parts of the animal. So that was what the movement that drove cell-based meats. And right now around the world, there are about 40 plus companies doing different types of meats, everything from beef, pork, chicken, fish like salmon and tuna as well. We're the only company doing shrimp currently globally. And then there are two companies doing lobster. One is us and another company in the US called Cultured Decadence as well. Yeah.
And I love the term clean meats. Like, I know shrimp has a connotation of, I think a famous report said it's a bottom feeder. It's usually it eats what's left over. Well, is there any environmental or like health benefits from a cell-based meat compared to a naturally farmed meat, or not naturally farmed, more like an industrially farmed meat?
Yeah, so one thing that the shrimp industry or the seafood industry has faced over the years is either, half-learned knowledge about the industry, or people that have seen the industry doing a lot of the cruel things to the animals. Mm-hmm. So one thing that has come up a lot is the excessive use of antibiotics in a lot of the shrimp farms. Because again, it's not all of the shrimp farms, it's some of them that are out there. They actually grow a lot of the shrimps in the crowded conditions, because let's say a part of the farm is supposed to grow 10,000 shrimps. I'm just giving random numbers, but let's say it's supposed to grow 10,000 shrimps, but eventually these farms, because they want to use the max of it, they start growing 20,000 shrimps. That is leading to a lot of viral and bacterial diseases. So for that, they start using chemicals and antibiotics. So it's kind of this loop that keeps going on. You want to grow the best meats, but at the same time, you want to grow more of it so that you can make more money. And then you end up overcrowding these farms, and that leads up to diseases, and that leads up to you using more antibiotics and chemicals. Mm-hmm. Eventually, all of that ends up in the animal, and then we are consuming that animal. So one stat that has, that we are comfortable talking about is 70 to 80% of the shrimp that is consumed globally currently is farmed and not ocean caught. So you can see where our shrimp comes from, but you don't have any clue which farm it comes from per se, but you can, think about how it's being processed and which kind of farm it's coming from. We know that a lot of sustainable aquaculture is coming up and so on, but none of us are able to keep up to the demands of the consumers. The amount of seafood that's required, and shrimp is one of the most consumed seafood products in APAC, given that it's used in a lot of the foods that we eat in every form, shape, and size. Not many Western countries use this, but shrimp paste is like a base dish for a lot of the dishes that we eat in APAC, in Asia specifically. So you can imagine the amount of shrimp that we consume on a daily basis in this part of the world, given that 60% of the world's population lives in Asia. So given all of these reasons, cell-based meats is an additional source of protein, an additional source of nutrition. Maybe 30 years down the line, we can disrupt the traditional farming industry that's there, or the factory farms that are there. But initially, we are coming in as a cleaner, healthier, more sustainable, additional source of food supply that's there. To answer your question about shrimps being bottom feeders and so on, since 80% of the shrimp actually comes from farms, they are literally not bottom feeders anymore, because in the farms, the farmers give the source of nutrition or the feed to the shrimp, and that's the shrimp that we eat. The feed that's given is questionable. Again, we don't know where it's sourced from and how it's made. So why we call it clean per se is we exactly know what goes into the animal. We exactly know what comes out. We exactly know what the meats have in them, how much of protein, what kind of protein, what are the vitamins, what are the nutrients in the final product. Yeah.
Oh, that's so interesting. And jumping from that to a little bit of both of your backgrounds. So first, Dr. Sriram, you started 2 startups before this, and I just wanted to ask about has there been any lessons or experiences from those two startups before this that has transferred or educated in how you've created this venture?
Sure. So actually my background is I'm a stem cell scientist. So I did my PhD in stem cell biology. I did a postdoctoral work for quite a couple of years. But my full-time role, I quit being a scientist and then took up business development. So I wanted to learn how to commercialize science. I wanted to learn the finance and budget side of science, which as a scientist, you never kind of get, insight into. So I did that. But as I was transitioning from a scientist to a business role, I started my first company, which was Biotech in Asia, which started up as a news or rather a blog where a couple of friends, we all got together and started writing science in simple English for everybody to understand, and also to demystify science and to take away the myth of science per se, and also to desensationalize science. What we found out as scientists was a lot of the media that was putting stories out there, they started sensationalizing science a bit too much. Stuff like studies that were done in mice. For example, we found an anti-cancer drug in mice. In the newspaper, it came out as drug for cancer discovered. But actually, it was only done in mice and not humans. And it was a sensationalist headline. While you read the article, you'll come to know that it's actually not done in humans yet. So that became very misleading for the audience. A lot of the consumers started questioning as to if the drug is there, then why isn't cancer being treated? But the truth is the drug is 10 years away from actually reaching human beings. So we started desensationalizing that, and that was my first startup. Learned a lot as to how not to run a startup through that experience. Learned a lot as to whatever can go wrong. And I did that as a part-time co-founder. What I mean by that is I didn't quit my job. I was still having my full-time job. I wasn't really confident if I could run a company on my own. So I was still kind of one leg here, one leg there. Soon after I left that company, left the partnership, the company is still going on. And then I started a second company, which I knew never needed me full-time on board. It was an event company that did science events for students like yourself and the rest of the audience in terms of skills development for science and engineering. So a lot of workshops, like we used to do workshops for science illustrations and so on. So very different, not so academic, not so industrial. Did that, the company is still going on, but COVID has literally stopped all events. So we are kind of diversify and see if we can do more online events per se. And I think through, starting up two companies and running them, I learned what not to do. So when I wanted to start Shiok, and I remember, speaking to Kai about this, I was like, I've learned a lot of stuff that we shouldn't do through running two startups. I don't know what can be done right. We will make mistakes as we, set up and run Shiok Meats, but I definitely know what mistakes we should not be doing. So that's kind of, I would say, the experience that I learned. And through the two startups, I built this entire investor network, entrepreneur network, all the connections. And in 2018, when I told all of them that I'm starting Shiok, we literally had our first investor, Ryan Bethencourt, was actually my first contact from my first startup. So he has seen me grow as a person, as an entrepreneur, as a scientist through the years. And when I told him I'm starting Shiok, he's like, here's my first check. Literally, that's how the conversation went. And he was one of the persons whom I literally ideated Shiok Meats over the phone with. And then he said, I'll put down the first check. And he's been a great advocate and a supporter of us. And then Kai met him soon. And then we kind of, have, I would say, built Shiok Meats together to an extent. Yeah.
Interesting. And some people say that's the first time you do a startup, it's so difficult, but the second time or the third time in this case.
Yeah.
And Dr. Ling, the question, and you really started up as more of a academic. You went to University of Wisconsin-Madison for 9 years as a PhD and as an undergraduate. Then you did research for a period of time. So many students are in this system where they're, as an academic, they go through every step of the process and they never know that there's a step away from that, and you can turn that knowledge and experience into a business or into like starting a new startup. So how did you transfer your knowledge in academics to business? And also actually Dr. Sandhya shares some of the same experiences, but especially from your perspective, what do you think?
Yeah, I mean, for Shiok Meats, the idea came from Sandhya and Ryan. Sandhya was looking for a scientist to join her so someone could help her on the scientific side since her interest was on the business side. So I didn't need to really bring my idea from the lab into the business side of things. I just brought over my knowledge. And kind of one of the big things I've seen and learned is that you have to change your academic mindset where, you can explore everything and there's not really any time limits to it. Your goal is to publish and to have grants, and you want to find out exactly how everything works. And that's not really how we work in a startup. We have a defined goal. We want to commercialize something. We might not understand exactly how it works at the point of time, but as long as it's safe and it works, and that's how we will go for it. So kind of the mindset is important. For me, along the way, I always knew that I wanted to explore something more than just a traditional academic role. So even during undergrad and then my PhD and postdoc, I often organized career workshops, attended them, tried to explore other things that are available. That's actually how I met Sandhya when she was sharing her experience with a bunch of postdocs on being a business development manager and then her other two startups. And that's how we met a few years ago. I think it's important that, to explore what is out there and to keep your mind open so you're ready for any new opportunities that come by.
I see. Yeah, and I totally agree. And I think coming from like a very research-heavy institution as UPenn, so many students who come out of it, especially UPenn also combines Wharton and the research side. So it's definitely a huge interest for people to go into business, but they never know what the path is. But you are a good example of that as possible, both of you. So, and then the next few questions, we'll soon start the Q&A section. So type in your questions when you can. But the next question I had was, what is your relationship with your competitors? In this case, it's very interesting because first, they're your competitors, but you have a common goal of getting people to adopt this new kinds of meats. And you have the common goal of exploring your supplier network to get more suppliers to provide these nutrients and these media to you. So what is your relationship with your competitors?
I would say the industry is so young and nascent, but so fast moving that we are more collaborative than competing per se. We literally are taking notes off each other. We're meeting at conferences right now. It's all virtual, but we try to maintain, at least from our side, we definitely try to maintain an amicable relationship with the companies. In more so to see where they are and how we can kind of get there at some point, because we are one of those companies that started a little later than the other bigger companies per se. So Memphis Meats, Mosa Meats, Finless Foods, and all of these are companies that started in 2014, 2015, 2016. We started up in 2018. So I mean, both Kai and I have literally seen these companies grow from scratch, and to see how successful and where they are, with their funding, with their team growth, with their technology. One of the key things that we did when we started the company was actually reach out to each of these companies and at least have some FaceTime with them to figure out what we should not be doing, literally. And also to take some great advice and suggestions from them, learn from them being in the industry. But one thing I think we all come together on definitely is the messaging to the audience, the consumer education, the consumer perception, the consumer awareness. We all want to get the messaging right, and we all want to get the messaging kind of together. We all want to advocate for each other, advocate for the industry as such, because it's so new. Kai can add a little more on how we collaborate on technology per se.
Yeah, I mean, like Sandhya said, the field is so small. that we try to work together. I mean, some people might say our competitors are more the plant-based side of things or the shrimp industry itself. For us, we have a interest to really just provide an additional supply of shrimp or crustaceans to the rest of the world. And this is such a young technology that we all need to work together. So we tend to, like Sandhya said, keep in touch with them and share whatever resources we can. For example, like, which are the companies that are good to tap into to get your equipment from, or who might be good partners to help work on some collaborative projects. We share what we can, and I think it has been a good relationship so far. And I think why, there's not really so much idea of competition so far is because we're so young that even for us to supply enough shrimp for Singapore itself will take us 1 or 2 manufacturing plants. It wouldn't just be tomorrow, and we're not all there yet. And also another thing that is big on us to all kind of share ideas and work together on is regulations. There is not really any framework set per se other than Singapore, there is sort of a guideline of how to submit your products for regulations. But honestly, they will keep changing until someone actually submits their product for regulation approval. So in a lot of other countries like US, it's a lot more complicated. Europe is also another huge area that's complicated. It's helpful for the different companies to share their progress and what different regulation boards are looking in towards on, so that it's easier for us to all get regulations approval and also to export and look into other markets and what we are starting with.
Just hopping on that trend, I think the most heated debate of cell-based meats throughout the world right now is amongst local legislator or state legislator, especially in the United States, who are debating very, very hard about everything from like what kind of name should be called on cell-based meats, or should it be called clean meats or cultured meat. And there's a huge fight within this. And Singapore is one of the few places that has legislation that is planned on this topic. But how do you see the industry navigating through these hurdles?
I think it will definitely take some time. I think US will be difficult, especially for the red meats and white meats, because it's complicated. There's a lot of different players on board. Even like you said, even just the naming will be an issue. Singapore doesn't have that problem because we don't have much local food production to start with. So there's not as much concerns from other parties, what we need to name the food. The concern is mostly whether the food is safe. So I think what we've seen in Asia Pacific when we did sort of a regulations conference seminar kind of thing, where it looks like several of the countries are looking to set up a common framework for the novel alternative foods, so that if you go through regulations, for example, in Singapore, if it's a shared regulations guidelines in Thailand or Vietnam, then you will have essentially been approved in all 3 countries. So that will definitely take time to set up, but I think it's the right way to go, especially with so many new products coming on board. I think it's a really a huge obstacle and takes time to go through.
And actually, that also brings up another topic. During COVID, I think food supply has been very, very difficult. And I know, Sandhya, if you want to talk about in Singapore during this time, how has the food supply been affected, and how Shiok Meats can possibly ease that concern?
Yeah, so like Kai said, in Singapore, we hardly produce anything. So we produce about 10% of our entire consumption. So we import 90% of our food. Everything from milk to eggs to seafood to meats to plants to vegetables to fruits. So this means that we have to be really careful. Food safety and security is a big thing in Singapore. But at the same time, we also recognize, or the government has recognized, that we have to increase our in-house food production as much as we can. So the government actually came up with a food story mandate last year around March. And they came up and said that Singapore wants to increase its food production to 30% by 2030. So it's called a 30 by 30 food mandate. And what they want to do is encourage local companies as well as innovators, entrepreneurs, local farms to actually increase their food production, and the government wants to support. So the government is funding, they're coming up with different grants, they're coming up with private funding. They are supporting as much as they can. As part of that, Shiok Meats nicely fits into that mandate. Actually, when we started Shiok, we never knew of this mandate. It was only announced when we were about 6-7 months old. So we rightly fit into it. So they are encouraging plant-based meats, they're encouraging cell-based meats, vertical farming, urban farming, vertical aquaculture. They're funding and supporting all of these companies and startups. They're encouraging more foreign companies to move over to Singapore to set up like an Asia base here or a Southeast Asia base here for manufacturing. Actually, as part of that, just a couple of days back, there's an announcement that a US company called Eat Just that produces plant-based eggs is actually setting up a $150 million manufacturing plant in Singapore for the Asia manufacturing. So that's like great news. It shows that the world believes in Singapore and they actually want to do something here. We are called a tiny red dot because we are so small. The country is probably the size of San Francisco or New York, but we are a whole country. So we're called a city, state, island country. And that's what we are. But we're able to make that mark and to show the entire world that we're really, really serious about food production and food tech, and that they want to encourage it. Yeah.
That's going to be a very interesting future.
Yeah.
In the past, everybody thought that natural resources, or like at least foods, was very, very inherent on the location of the geography. But what this could mean is in the future, the greatest food producer is not is the smallest in a factory or in a very, very small city.
Right.
Okay, yes. Going into questions, one of the questions we had was, so this is from David Soul. I certainly see a sustainable future of growing meat in this way. What are some difficulties you're currently facing? And are input costs high in relation to outputs?
Yeah, Kay, you want to take that?
Yeah, some of the biggest challenges for us to get to market are the costs. One of the cost, and what else is there, scaling up, and then regulations and consumer perception. So for cost-wise, the most expensive part of the process is what we feed our stem cells. That has traditionally been done for pharmaceutical medical purposes, which needs very small quantities compared to food production. Now we're thinking very large quantities. And also to be able to source them from food ingredients instead of having to individually process each amino acid, each sugar, and then put them back together is kind of trying to innovate and bring down the cost, which is a huge part of our R&D process as well. Then the next part of scaling up, to be able to build the equipment for food application instead of medical purposes, and then to have in large enough quantities for us to produce meats. Whether it's the feed, the equipment to house the cells itself, it's something that is an ongoing conversation. I'm sure all of the cell-based companies are having with the companies who produce these equipment and the nutrient feed. So to get them on board to refocus some of their efforts on medical purpose to food applications is another huge thing. Then, as we kind of spoken about, regulations, even naming and all of that is something that has to be ironed out before we can ever be commercialized. I think a lot of the companies believe that Singapore is a great outlook that it's most probable where products of cell-based meats will be first seen. So that's another one. And then finally, consumer education. I'm not sure how many of you listening here have heard of cell-based meats before we talked about here today. But a lot of people still are hesitant when they don't know about it. Like, what is this? This seems strange. Why are we using stem cells? Are they fake meat? Is it artificial meat? So there's a lot of consumer education to be done. But I think at least for the younger generation like yours, you guys are a lot more open and interested in future sustainable ways to produce food and to kind of save the environment. So those are the main obstacles we have for cell-based meats.
I have to say, when I was preparing for this interview, I did a few trying to educate my parents and my family, and I think they were very, very worried or a little bit skeptical about what this meant. But I think talking to you and listening to this interview would hopefully be a very, very good education on what that can be in the future. The next question is, this is for Sandhya. In the biotech industry, what other trends should students be aware of and potentially capitalize on in this coming century that's outside of this new meat industry, just from your experience in the science space?
Sorry, can you repeat that? I lost you a little bit.
No problem. What other innovations in science and biotech can students be planning or foreseeing in the future? And how can we be a part of that as well?
Okay, sure. So I think as what we have seen in the last couple of decades and traditionally is three things that science can add a lot of value to. And I think students should start thinking in those three main, I would say huge umbrellas. They're not very specific, but one is, of course, disease prevention, and so on, more on the epidemic side of things. And I think COVID has, strengthened that idea of that we need more infectious disease scientists out there who are really looking at vaccinations for unknown diseases or very rare diseases, which is kind of becoming a global pandemic now. Like, for example, I still remember when I was an undergrad in 2007, a long time ago, Ebola was something that we read in the books and that was said it's only seen in Africa. But, 10 years after that, we see it happening as a global pandemic. So, diseases that were supposed to be only in certain countries or certain parts of the world, because of the globalization and the excessive travel that we're doing, is kind of spreading all over, and it's affecting every population around the world. So I think infectious diseases, disease prevention, metabolic diseases, lifestyle diseases like diabetes and obesity and blood pressure have become so common in youngsters. I have 30-year-old, 35-year-old friends that are already diabetic, and diabetic was supposed to be something that the older generation used to get. So I think these are two key things under, I would say, diseases. The second hot topic that's not going to, go away or phase away is food tech. Everything from plant-based to cell-based to insect-based meats, proteins, dairy products and everything around it. But also a lot has to be done in terms of ancillary research that's required for these kind of products. Like Kai mentioned, one of the key challenges for us is to find a cheaper, better, edible, nutritional media to grow our cells in. Honestly, as a cell-based meat company, we shouldn't be doing this research in-house. It should be done in universities or industries, and we should be able to buy this product per se. So that requires a lot of research, and students can look a lot more into it. Third is anything to do with climate change. I think it kind of adds into the first two umbrellas that I spoke about, but I think, climate change is just not for environmentalists and people who are doing environmental science. It's actually for biologists, physicists, chemists, even mathematicians to understand what's happening around the world, to look at stats and to look at predictions and to look at what can be done even before things happen. So I would say these are three big umbrellas that we see a lot of interest in, and that's something that's never going to go away. As the population is becoming more, you need to be part of these three big industries for sure. Yeah.
And just on the last topic, one of the famous questions is do a pre-mortem. So if cell-based industry doesn't succeed, what would be the reason?
Right. So I think it's not the question of will it not succeed? I think the question is how long will it take to succeed? So I have a feeling like the way things are going, I have no doubt, or rather Kai and I have no doubt that cell-based meats will succeed. But I think the question, or perhaps an answer to that question, is how long will it take for us to reach that mass production scale? Just to give you a small number to like think of, in Singapore, where the population is less than 6 million people, we consume about 60 kilograms of seafood per year per person. So even if you take, let's say only 80% of the population consumes seafood, so let's take 4 million to do the math easily. 4 million of Singapore's population consumes about 60 kilograms of seafood per year per person. Just to produce that amount, like she said, it might need us to set up 1 or 2 large-scale manufacturing plants to do that. For a small country like Singapore with these numbers, imagine a country like China or India where the population is 1.2 billion. To reach that scale, how long will it take and will we succeed, or when will we succeed is probably the question. For that to happen, we need a lot more investment to go into this industry. We need a lot more industries to come into this industry. We, of course, need the consumers to start thinking more and pushing for this industry to commercialize and scale up as soon as possible.
If you would give a prediction, how long do you think it would take for part of...
Definitely north of 10 to 15 years. So for us to reach that mass scale production, we are predicting somewhere around 2035 will be the time when we are able to say 40% of the entire world's seafood production is from cell-based meats, or 40% of the entire meat production is via cell-based meats. Yeah.
And the last question we ask is, what is your advice for students amidst this pandemic? If you were in our shoes, what would you give us as advice?
Yeah, Kai, do you want to go first?
Sure. I need a moment to think about it. I think, what you guys are doing are great. You're reaching out from the other side of the world, talk to different people of different topics, explore things you might be interested in, maybe try to do some internships if you can remotely. And kind of, if you are not physically in school, that's something that would be possible to do as well. So keep you guys engaged, explore different topics, and talk to as many people as you can.
Yeah, I think for me, it's the era of, we have always been in the digital era for the last couple of years. And I guess you are the ones who are using digitalization as much as possible, compared to even Kai and me, I guess. So given that COVID has further pushed us into being on our phones and our computers all the time, I think this is the time that you, take a step forward and learn a lot more, see what's out there, like read a lot, attend a lot of webinars and conferences as much as you can, and ask a lot of questions. Wherever you think, don't think of the question, oh, will it be too dumb, or, will people judge me? Who really cares? At the end of the day, you want to increase your knowledge. You want to make it, you want to gain more knowledge. So ask all the questions that you can, and ask the questions repeatedly, and see what different people have different answers or different views on it, and then form your own views and opinions on it. And honestly, go for something that you truly, truly believe in, that something that sits with you right, and you feel that you can do this for the rest of your life. It might change in the next 10 years, but at least for the 10 years that you're doing it, you would be really, really satisfied with what you're doing and really happy. At the end of the day, the world's moving so fast that we are actually forgetting happiness, satisfaction, and personal gains, in the sense not about money, but more about knowledge and, being content with what you have. I think we have lost that as human beings. And I think the younger generation really wants that. They want to be content and happy and satisfied. And please go for that more than, oh, because the other person's doing that, I want to do that as well. Yeah.
Yeah. To sum it up, learn as much as you can from as many people. Thank you so much, Dr. Ling and Dr. Sriram. You guys are really inspirations for female entrepreneurs, for science entrepreneurs, for different people, and for us. Thank you so much, and appreciate it.
Thank you so much for having us. I mean, I think virtual webinars, it's really sad that we can't see you. You can only see us. So please feel free to reach out to us. We'd love to have some sort of a personal connection to some of you. I mean, you might be our team members in the future and so on. So please do reach out to us if you need anything. Yeah.
Appreciate it. Thanks
you. Thanks for having us.
Bye. Yeah.